something, I know, like sysadmins, we're good at that, sort of, we don't mind being out of the spotlight, and I say that standing in front of two spotlights as bright as the sun. There's a lot of work that goes unnoticed. If we get our jobs done, then people don't really notice that. And when I say targeted, I mean sort of general bot behavior, things that are out there just constantly pinging IP addresses from the internet to a workstation, from the internet to everything in your library. Maybe these content-based attacks like phishing or websites that have drive-by toolkits installed on them, that kind of thing. I'm not talking targeted by like the NSA or the Five Eyes or did everybody see just the recent Vault 7 Zero, what was it called? Vault 7 Year Zero release from the CIA, all their tools and stuff. Oh, so cool, they have so many cool things, if you're into that kind of thing. So the CIA is just the CIA, has their fingers in everything, like your TV. They can get into it and watch you in your whatever room you have your TV in. I hope it's not your bedroom now. And that's just the CIA. And you know, the NSA probably has even better stuff. And then that's just like they're the good guys. The Russians and the Chinese and whoever else has the same kind of stuff. So not that target. All this stuff doesn't need to be perfect. You know, I said 85% of all targeted attacks, and that's a lot. That's like all of the bots and all of the automated stuff out there. We don't really need to be perfect all the time because they're going to try standard things. They're going to ping away, and then they're just kind of going to move on. You know, it's like, I love this. Everybody probably has heard this saying, you don't have to outrun the bears. It's chasing you. Just as long as you outrun your friend, they're going to fall and get eaten, and you can keep running. So it's the same kind of thing. So I thought long and hard about this slide, and I thought I'm going to leave it here for two reasons. One, it's probably the worst slide that you're going to see all day, and so far I was right about that. The second one is just sort of giving you an idea. There's this many things that you can do, but we're just going to talk about 5 of them. And it comes from this. This is from basically the NSA of Australia. And there's a million lists out here out there like this. Theirs is updated regularly. It's really easy to read. It's really, you know, this chart is, when you focus on certain parts, it's great. So I started with this and sort of put all sorts of other things in it. So these are the 5 things, finally got to them. The first one is filtering. And I know as librarians, we hear filters and we think, so it's kind of that. I mean, it's filtering out the bad stuff. Application whitelisting, which is at the operating system level, keeping things patched, hardening, and monitoring. So this list starts at 0, I think, or 1. I think really the list should start at 0 because I think that these things are like, we already do these things, right? We have backups and we test them. We don't run things as admin. We don't let regular people run as admin or root. There was a study that just came out recently from Avecto. I think it's pronounced Avecto. You don't run as admin and you lock out a lot of these things. We all use good passwords. We don't all use the same password for everything. In our libraries, we don't have our library's name, a cat's name, the address, the word Dewey, and our zip code as the library password, and it's not the same thing for everything, right? Nobody's nodding, right? In my position, I have to ask people for their passwords quite often, and it's always got book or Dewey or cat or the address of the library in it. So yeah, that's not good. Reboot to restore, which is things like deep freeze and that kind of thing. And antivirus, I put a question mark there because yeah, if it's sort of a regular person's computer, it probably should be there, but now we're learning that antivirus is a way for the attackers to get into our computer and hide in there. So application whitelisting, it's different on every version of Windows. It's different on every operating system. Basically, you just tell the operating system to never run anything that's not in this list. And this is one of these things where I don't have hands-on experience with it. So as I was working on this presentation, I thought, well, I'm going to see if there's anything new with application whitelisting. So the first, I hope this is readable out there. The first is just a Google search result from a couple weeks ago. First result was from Bleeping Computer, and I thought, oh, I know Bleeping Computer, they're good. Second result, I go back, second result is bypassing application whitelisting. And I thought, oh, that's perfect. I'm going to go talk about this. And it's from last year, so, you know, I don't know if this is a saying, but I thought of it as I was writing this. For every defense, there's an equal and opposite and probably greater offense. NIST has a really nice guide out. Every operating system has something you can do to do application whitelisting. So the second thing is keeping things patched, updated, however you want to call it. Everything, operating system, programs, always immediate. And I know, and websites, I know that when I say immediate, you're going to think, well, maybe, but what happens if it breaks things? So this is also ripped from the headlines, ripped from my inbox last week. So I host a lot of Drupal library websites, and I said, hey, your Drupal library website is like frighteningly out of date. I don't know how this happened. It's the first time I noticed there's security updates on everything. It's like, so I said, hey, you should update this, and hopefully you can read it. They replied, we've been reluctant to do any security updates because we don't want to break the site. We're preparing a WordPress site, and oh my God, if they don't update WordPress, they're so dead. Thanks for keeping an eye on it, though. It's still in my inbox. I don't know how to reply. And I thought, this is going to be a great topic for next year's Code4Lib. How do you reply to stuff like this? Because we've all probably gotten something like this. How do you reply without sounding like a big jerk? I don't know. I haven't done it yet. Hardening, so this is a sort of a general term. Anything that's on a computer, you can lock it down a little bit better. The defaults probably aren't super secure. So we're talking browsers, you know, you take out Flash and you take out Java. You have some kind of privacy plugins that were mentioned this morning, Privacy Badger, that kind of stuff. Office, the macros go off, that kind of stuff. Don't install anything that's not used. And there's this least privilege thing. Basically, don't let anyone or anything do anything on that computer you don't want them to. Filtering, this starts with like spam and virus filtering in your email, the website, DNS, maybe through your DNS, maybe through the firewall. Basically, you know, find a way to block out all that bad, icky stuff. And finally, monitoring. If something goes wrong, you should be able to see it happen, hopefully in real time-ish. At the very least, you could go back and see when it happened, how it started, that kind of stuff. So when you put all these together, this is a nice little layer here. Hopefully the filters have blocked that evil email attachment. If it did get in, maybe the program it started was not on the whitelist. Maybe the program it started was updated and it was hardened, so it didn't get through all that. And finally, if it made it through all that, well, you know, you're monitoring, you caught it, you've done a good job. And this is security by layers. Normally, I talk about security for at least an hour, and that's a lot. I've done it for 8 hours. I do this all the time. I love it. It's really important. I hope libraries have somebody talk about security at every single conference. So it was hard to limit just 5 things. So very quickly, set up honeypots in your library. That is, the bad guys get in, they go after these things. Run things on non-standard ports, which is security by obscurity, which isn't perfect, but it does amazingly well against the bots. Really non-standardize all the things because the bots do the same thing all the time. And if it's just off by a little bit, you've outrun the bear there. Hopefully we all have our network segmented in the library, public, private, staff, whatever, that kind of thing. Do threat modeling, that is, understand your adversary, know what's in the library, know how to defend it. And then, of course, training, the 8th layer being, the 7 layers of the model, the 8th layer being the people. Everybody needs to know about this stuff in some way or the other. And finally, make sure that you keep up on the latest thing. I realize we all know Eric Hellerman and his work now because he's told us so often. I didn't know he'd be introducing me or on the stage today, but he's done some really good writing about, guess what? HTTPS and other things, the privacy side of things. It's the Library Freedom Project. I don't know why I wrote Library Privacy Project. Don't tell Allison that I did that. She'll be really mad at me. The Sec4Lib news group, just like Code4Lib and all the other 4Lib things out there. And I've done a lot of writing. I've got a lot of slides and stuff out there, and I've got it up on lasnews.org/security. So I have a little bit of time for questions. I'll be around for a while tonight, too, if you have questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Blake. Your payment, you'll get that. Yeah, we have questions. Anyone have questions for Blake? You all have secure websites, right? You don't have any worries, right? Really? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
All right. One question right here.
I just wanted to comment, I think it would be so wonderful to have a Slack channel or some communication sort of network for people to come to with questions about those Acunetic security scans or the other ones, basically saying, what does it mean? Because I don't know where this is, that I can fix it.
Yeah, and I do. I run the Security for Lib mailing list. So that's, it's very low volume. That's what people, yeah, it's a perfect opportunity for that kind of stuff.
And is there a Slack channel for security on libraries? No? There will be later, right? All right, thanks, Blake. And there's a card for you right there. I forgot to bring it up. Okay, the next talk, it sounds like it's in this theme, but I think it's actually quite different. It's called Going Off the Rails on a Jekyll Train, Creative Uses of Static Site Generators by Todd Stauffer.
That's not me.
Nope.
That is me.
Right.
All right. This. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Todd Stauffer. I'm with NCSU Libraries. And today, my talk's going to focus on an approach we took to sunset a Rails application, but not fully sunset it, rather transition it over to Jekyll as a static site. So it does fit somewhat in that security realm, and we'll get into some of those details later. And we'll talk a little bit about the approach. But first, I wanted to give a little bit of background on the site itself. So here's a Go link if you want to check out the new site. This is kind of our first version of it, so there'll be some changes coming up. But Red, White, and Black was started as a campus walking tour. So there was a professor in the Department of History, as well as the program coordinator for the African American Cultural Center, had done research to identify physical locations on campus that were significant to the African American experience on campus throughout all of the campus history. So they had deeply researched this project and identified a bunch of physical locations on campus, and then started doing some walking tours where they would take students, faculty, staff around and kind of narrate what was happening at different times in history and why that location was significant. And so the libraries became involved when they started doing their research. They wanted to find photos and documentation and yearbooks and that sort of thing that they could share with folks to let them know, to bring a little more personal information into it, so you could really see the person that they were talking about. You could really understand the time, the aesthetics of the time, and what was happening. And then at some point, the libraries actually started contributing to the walks by our university archivist would go on the walks and present part of the walk. But this led to a situation where the main goal was to get all of these rich items of history we had in our special collections that had been digitized into the hands of users that might not come into the libraries or come into the special collections website and find them. And we really wanted it physically in their hands. We didn't want them sitting in front of a computer looking at it, and not everybody could join us on a walk. So we decided to develop something, maybe a site or an app that could be used to kind of give or approximate the experience of going on the actual tour without actually needing to be physically present. So it had locations marked on a map, shows the events. There would be narrations that were scripted out that would play in it. And it was really a really nice thing. At the time, mobile apps were trendy. They were really trendy. But not only were they trendy, they were really functional. So this was about 5 or 6 years ago. And as we all know, mobile development wasn't quite where it is today, so there wasn't necessarily the idea of mobile-first development as such. It was mobile-only versus desktop-only. So we built a mobile-only, and I say we, but I mean that kind of the royal we, because I wasn't there at the time. Corey Lowen actually built the original app. So here you see a screenshot of what the original site looked like on a phone. And people really liked it. American Libraries even called us trendy at a certain point in time because we were in the trends section. But it was really a cool concept of getting this content into somebody's hands that might not otherwise come look for the content somewhere else. But like all things, our fame and fortune eventually would come to an end. A mobile app built in 2011 doesn't hold up the same way as a mobile app that would be built now. So apps get old, mobile in particular. We've seen that the design trends, UX trends have kind of grown exponentially since that time. And so it started to look really old. Not only did it look old apps are really, really expensive to maintain. So this was an app that was built, I believe, using Rails 3, which means that it requires a ton of ongoing maintenance. There's dependencies upon dependencies upon dependencies that need to be maintained. You're maintaining both your app server. We also have the database maintenance issues that we were concerned about. So there's all of this infrastructure that you have to maintain. And in some situations that makes sense, but for an application like this, there's a relatively low return on investment for all that maintenance. So this isn't one of our core library applications that we have thousands of users visiting every day. There's a smaller subset of really dedicated users that we want to ensure they have a good experience, but the idea of spending all this time and money and developer time and keeping that up to date wasn't necessarily going to be the biggest return on investment. So what should we do? We kind of had the idea of three options. The first option, a lot of folks would say with an older app like this that maybe isn't super high traffic, is just shut it down. But we didn't want to do that. This is a very special app to us. It showcases a really unique project that was put together with the diversity of initiatives on campus, bringing a lot of different groups together to showcase diverse perspectives on campus. So we knew that we wanted the content to stay somewhere. We could upgrade it. We could take it to Rails 4 or Rails 5 and rebuild it in that. But when thinking through that process, where would that really get us? In 2 years, 3 years, there would be a new version, and we would just be in that cycle over and over again, and it would still be that same technical overhead. So we started to look to see if we could simplify it. So this kind of presents the best case scenario. What if we can make it as simple of a thing as possible, remove most of the technical overhead, and have it work the same way that it was currently working? And maybe even better, what if we can make it work just a little bit better, add in a few extra things? And we found out that we can, so we did. Our solution was to use these three primary technologies. So we used mainly Jekyll, Google Spreadsheets, and Lunar.js. And I know all of these have kind of gotten a little bit of a shout out earlier today, but I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on each. So I think most folks here are probably pretty familiar with Jekyll. It's a static website generator. You take some files that are Markdown, HTML, run them through a Ruby thingamajigger, and then it goes out. You get some site files, and you can put those up in just a simple web host. It's really a nice, clean way to make a static website. And one of the advantages is that most of your main content can live in really easily readable files. It can live in a text file, it can live in a Markdown file, it can live in a CSV. Jekyll also handles data files in a really cool way. So you can kind of have this database-like experience where Jekyll can refer out to a CSV or a YAML file to provide data to individual pages. And getting back onto the security notion, it creates sites that are really fast, really secure. Don't have to worry about WordPress updates on a static site. And it's super, super simple to deploy. So this is kind of just a little bit of a general structure of what a Jekyll site looks like. As a directory structure, it looks like what you would expect. It looks like a website structure, except some of the files happen to be in Markdown. Some of them in certain places happen to be YAML files, but you get your CSS, your JavaScript, whatever else you kind of need in there. And then, if you haven't seen one, what a Jekyll page looks like, there's just some YAML front matter that the page can then refer to later as it's building the site. So it's really super easily readable. If we need to transfer this off onto another technology in 3 or 4 years, all of the text is just there and easily found. So now the controversial part of my talk. I love spreadsheets. I argue we should use spreadsheets more and not less. And so I had the idea of we wanted to provide a CMS-like experience for this app. There's new historical events that are going to be happening that we're going to want to update on the site, and we want folks to be able to provide that content themselves. So in thinking of how we were going to do that, I started looking at the idea of using Google Spreadsheets as our content management system. And there's a handful of advantages to this. So one is that The non-technical stakeholders in this project can still add content to the project and contribute to the project, but we don't have to maintain any of that kind of front-facing infrastructure. We don't have to maintain any of the forms or any of that sort of stuff. Another one that's kind of easy and makes me happy is it offloads the issues of authentication and backups to Google. That's Google's problem now. We are a Google Apps school, so everybody can authenticate. We can determine who we share this particular spreadsheet with, but again, we're not maintaining that. Then it's also has this really nice function of being able to easily publish a CSV file, so none of the stuff that we're storing in these spreadsheets is sensitive information. It's all living on a public site. So you get this really long, somewhat publicly accessible, if we wanted it to be, URL that we can download a CSV from that goes straight into the Jekyll project. So we've basically taken this, which is your typical Rails admin-y looking thing that connected back to the database, and this is where folks would add new content, and replaced it with this. So it's just a giant Google spreadsheet. You see the tabs at the bottom. You can think of those as database tables. So we have an events one, we've got a places one, and then we can add more later if we need to. And all of the data that comes into this can be added via Google Form. And then there's a handful of formulas in different cells in the spreadsheet that are doing data normalization to make sure that if they entered in a certain image ID, it does all the normalization it needs so that we retrieve the right image, that sort of thing. Another really exciting part is we wanted it to have search. So the previous site didn't have search, so we used Learner.js that was mentioned earlier. And it is a really awesome tool that provides somewhat Solr-like search, but all client-side and a static site. So it basically builds a little JSON index when you build the site, and then you have search. You can do things like boost, so you can boost titles, URLs, any of the YAML front matter that's included on a page can be boosted. So if we want search results for buildings to be boosted a little bit higher, we can do that. And this is what the search results look like. So do a search and it comes back with nice clean search results with links out to each of the pages that contain that content. You can see the ones at the top we've boosted based on the title, and then down towards the bottom, the search results actually appear somewhere inside the description of that page. So here is what the build process looks like, and it's kind of a Frankenstein's monster of how to build a static website in maybe an overly complicated way. But the idea is that you take a Google form, you enter in all the information that we need for each events page, and that gets dropped into Google Spreadsheets. Some of the text gets normalized in there and spread out and put into different columns that Jekyll's going to need. And then we can run a build script. That build script uses Python to download CSVs of each of those tabs, and then processes those and outputs a bunch of pages. So it's either a bunch of events pages and then a bunch of places pages, and puts those in the right kind of file structure that Jekyll needs with all of the right front matter. It also creates our data files. So we have a CSV and a YAML data file that the pages refer to during the build process. And then once it gets everything that it needs, you have a bunch of Jekyll files, and then Jekyll builds it into HTML files. So it goes and looks out at all those data files and everything else. Using liquid templating, it puts everything in the right place that we told it that it needs to go. And we've got a bunch of HTML files left over, and then it just rsyncs everything up to our web server. So the results, we were able to take down the Rails application, the database that it was relying on, move it over into a more secure environment because it doesn't have any of those dependencies that needs to be updated. It runs much, much quicker than the old site ran. Updating the content is arguably much easier. People aren't having to go to a place that they can never quite remember where that Rails admin was, log in, make sure that they individually have admin permissions. We can just give them access to the Google form. And then we have some screenshots. So this is what the original desktop site looked like. And there wasn't a desktop site. It was meant to be mobile only, so it just stretched out. And this is what the new site looks like. And then here's a before and after on the mobile. So the next steps, we're already using our IIIF server to serve all of the images that are housed in the individual pages. But we want to kind of further implement that with what they're able to do with cropping on individual images within IIIF. So for a lot of the content that we have, this is a site about groups that have been historically underrepresented in our archives, so we don't have an individual image file for every single person that's mentioned in the site. But there's a good chance that we have a commencement pamphlet with their name on it or their image in a yearbook. And so being able to use that cropping to crop out just an individual yearbook image and serve that as the primary image, and then get folks back out to the rest of our IIIF implementation to get more details on it. And then also there's a handful of new content updates. So now that we've made it a little bit easier to update, there's quite a few new items that we want to pull in so that we'll have more areas of interest on the map. So if you have any questions, I'll be around after for a few minutes. I think we might have a minute or so for questions, or send me an email, or I'm on Twitter.
Sounds like more of a off the rails and into a Jekyll rocket ship, huh?
Sure.
Okay, question over there.
Thank you. Obviously, a lot of people are familiar with spreadsheets, but I'm wondering if you could kind of discuss how you introduced this to staff and the content owners. Was there training involved, or how did you go about doing that?
So that they won't actually need to interact with the spreadsheet at all. There's a simple Google form that lists out an image ID, which they're getting from our rare and unique images collection, the description that they want to show exactly as it'll show on the page, and a couple of other items. There's a drop down to pick the location that we've already preloaded. Once they fill that out, it goes into the form responses part of the Google spreadsheet, and then from there, there's just handfuls of formulas that pull that straight into each page that it needs to go into and does all of the data cleaning on it. So they don't have to worry about any of the spreadsheet management.
Great question. Thanks, Todd. All right, the next thing we have is going to be a remote presentation from Ruth Collings. So, you want to get this going? Thanks. So Ruth is going to talk about every library is a technology organization, bringing DevOps principles to libraries. And hopefully, there she is. I see her.
What was that?
Sorry,
Okay.
we don't see you yet.
Am I good to go?
No, not yet.
You're going to have to move it over to the
Yeah,
other screen.
yeah, yeah. You want me to do it?
Yeah, we've got it in the presentation here. I think.
Oh, it's probably behind this other one. Yeah. Yeah. All right, you're good to go, Ruth.
Great. All right. Hello, everybody. I can't see you, so this is a little weird, but I'm going to be talking about libraries as a technology organization and bringing DevOps principles to libraries. I'd like to start by thanking Aaron Collier and Whitney Watkins for making this remote presentation possible. And I'd also like to acknowledge that this conference is taking place on the traditional lands of the Tongva and Gabrielino people, and I currently live and work on in Wolastoqey people in what is now Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. I currently work as a full-time reference librarian, but I've also been a solo systems librarian and a web development librarian before, so I've been on multiple sides of the library in terms of IT. I also owe a little partial credit to Jillian Byrne at the Toronto Reference Library for giving a presentation at Access this year that really sparked this idea. So in the abstract for this talk, I referenced the DevOps handbook. If I mention anything that is a quote and I don't mention where it's quoted from, it's going to be from the DevOps handbook. But I'm going to be trying to remove all the jargon and tech speak from the handbook in order to translate the work into the library organization. There we go. So this is a quotation from Christopher Little. Every company is a technology company, regardless of what business they think they're in. A bank is just an IT company with a banking license. Now, this might not be a hard sell to this audience, but trying to tell some librarians and library workers that the library is an IT company might be a little more difficult. But even if you agree that the library is an IT company, that's definitely not reflected in our current organizations. If you want to learn more about this topic, you should look up the essay Libraries Are Software by Cody Hansen. And I have the slides and the notes online. You can look up my Twitter account, and I have a link to this article there. So here's a scenario. Systems wants to keep things running smoothly and for there to be no problems, but public services wants to implement new features and new ideas really fast. But large important systems like the ILS are too fragile to update frequently. People become territorial about their areas of work because they don't want something to break and it be their fault. Even small decisions start requiring permission from multiple people, committees. And your organization feels like it's lagging behind other organizations. Eventually, everybody starts wondering if there's any point in their work, and then people who can afford to quit. So this is the death spiral, also referred to as the core chronic conflict. And if this sounds familiar, it does happen to all kinds of organizations, all kinds of businesses. It's really not a library thing. This is the problem that DevOps proposes to solve. This is just an overview of what the DevOps handbook goes over. And I'm not really going to get into any of this in detail because that would take much longer than 20 minutes. You can, so doing DevOps means faster and more frequent implementation of ideas, fewer crunch time emergencies, improved worker morale, and more stability in key systems. It requires clear, consistent, measurable goals, group trust and empowerment of all workers, and dedication to improvement of work processes, and then ongoing constant assessment, feedback, and testing. If there's one point I can emphasize about DevOps is that, in my interpretation, it is about the process of working better and making work better for our coworkers rather than Kanban boards, Scrum meetings, sprints. Those are the things you can do, but if you start from the premise of making work better, then those things will come on their own. So the fundamental premise of DevOps is in the name. It's a combination of development and operations. Usually, so I would say that public services or reference or front-facing librarians are in the place of development, and systems or IT are in the place of operations. Usually, public services or public-facing people have a problem, and then they hand it over to systems and say, make it work. So I would say instead of DevOps in libraries, we have PubSys. So the ideal PubSys library, I would say, so in our ideal library on Mars, it's a university library because that's what I've worked in, but I would not look down on the Mars Public library system. We start at the top of the org chart with the university librarian, who is the lead decision maker type person. Normally they would report to someone above them, but they would generally make all the important decisions for the library. Underneath the university librarian would be an administration team who handles HR, finances, legal issues, interpersonal issues, budgeting, that sort of thing. And that's where it's going to start to get messy. So this might sound highly theoretical, but instead of the usual departmental committee model that we usually see in libraries, I would like to see us explode that out into project groups. Everything will be a project group or a working group or whatever you want to call it. These would be headed by a project leader whose expertise would be in project management. And I want to emphasize that they are a leader of the project, but not necessarily the boss of the team. They have a certain area of expertise, just like everybody else. And then you have area experts in whatever is necessary for the project, web development, subject areas, various systems. And then you might also have public-facing workers who are related to the project or who would be implementing part of it, and or anybody who is curious about learning more in the process of developing the project. So you might be asking, what's the entire point of reorganizing your entire library structure? That sounds hard. Why don't we just implement some agile stuff? I would like you to think back to the presentation yesterday morning by Dre Orphanades. The idea of systems thinking really comes behind a lot of this. There's something called Conway's Law. It was invented by the computer programmer Melvin Conway back in the late 1960s. He stated that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. And I think the most obvious example of this is the library website. Most library websites are organized such that they reproduce the silos and structures of the organization that they are representing. So you have a section for reference information, you have a section for computer information, you have a section for the catalog. So with these kinds of, with this existing structure, it's very difficult to work outside it. So I think in order to make changes into our systems that we implement in terms of our services and our technology, we need to first change ourselves and how our organization is structured. And I think DevOps is one way that we can make that happen by forcing public services and systems to work closer together on everything. And when they do, that will hopefully cascade down to the services and products that we offer to our patrons. So this presentation is the super tip of the iceberg. There are so many other writings, books, research on these topics, and obviously I haven't tried implementing this, so I have no idea if it would work or not. If you decide to try it, let me know. So these are some key terms you can search for related topics. There are organizations out there who are experimenting with how they're being run, and it's not just small startups. There are a lot of examples out there now of larger organizations who have recognized the death spiral and are trying to step out of that, because if you fail as a business, then you go bankrupt. So there's a little higher stakes there. I think the key part to this is that there needs to be a leader or a champion who can bring this in and develop trust and integration within the structure. A lot of places, not just libraries, have been forced to ask themselves, what do we need to do to flourish for the next 20 years? I think the answer to is at least partially take on some of the DevOps ideas, because our systems and IT are the library. They're not just a part of the library. Making them less ancillary to our work, I think, is key to us lasting a long time and providing the best possible service and use that we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ruth, we have plenty of time for questions.
Ruth, you're going to need to repeat the questions, please.
Okay.
Questions for Ruth? I think it's really good that we ended today in Mars, because that's, you know, we have to shoot high, right? Any questions? All right, I think everybody's getting tired today, and thank you very much, Ruth. One more question. There is a question. Where's the question? Yes, we have a question.
So it sounded like you were talking about crossing silos and bringing public services and IT together. That's can be a tall order. Do you have any recommendations or a pathway to get there?
I think one of the ways you can start is if you have a small project that's coming up, something like a new section of the website, maybe you're implementing a new discovery layer, something that will naturally require work from both areas, and try and develop a working group of some kind that includes people from all the different groups. If you can do it with a smaller project, and a discovery layer is not a small project, so maybe something smaller than that. But if you can do it with a small group, then and it works, then you can sell it as to the rest of the organization.
Okay, I think it's, well, one more.
Hi, Ruth. I noticed that the last bullet point said servant leadership, and I was curious what you had in mind. If you can elaborate a little bit or throw some light on that.
Ruth, could you repeat the question, please?
Hear most of it.
Servant leadership.
Yes, can you elaborate on
Tell us more
servant
about that.
leadership? Did Ruth get the question?
Sorry, I think it was cutting out while I was.
So the questioner would like to know a little bit more about servant leadership.
Servant leadership is a term relating to being a manager who is not about being in control, but exists to improve the people who work under them. So in a sense of being a public servant, you work for the people who you manage as opposed to being in control of them. So the ideally you're working to make their work lives better, to help them do their work better, send them to conferences, try and make their lives better as opposed to just dictating what we're going to do today.
All right, I think it's really cool that we started out this afternoon session thinking about information architecture, and then thinking about failure and threats, and then thinking about fixing things, and finally thinking about the architecture of our organizations themselves. So let's thank Ruth again, and let's thank all of the speakers who did a really great job. And let's thank all the helpers in the room, the timers, the web enablers, everybody. Okay, so So I have a few announcements. First of all, there's a social event tonight. It is the Share and Play event. It is being held in Kirchhoff Hall, the Grand Salon, starting at 6:30 p.m. And there are directions on the 2017 Code4Lib.org website, although you need Flash, I think. Be sure to bring your lanyard, and feel free to bring games to play. I've seen on the sign up there are already a lot of games that people are bringing, so people will be playing. And if you have beers, drinks, or food that you want transported to the Play and Share event, you should go to the valet area at the front of the hotel between 5:15 and 5:30, and there will be a car that you can load stuff in to transport them to the Play and Share event. Also, an opportunity for all of us, if you missed the galleries at the Fowler Museum last night, the museum is open until 8 p.m. tonight and has free admission. Anyone have any other announcements before we adjourn? Okay, we have one announcement. Do you want to come up and be on the mic?
I just wanted to mention that you've probably all heard of ARPANET, and one of the first machines that's part of it is just one building over here at UCLA. So usually they have tours, but I got someone to open the room for myself and anyone else that's interested in walking over there and just taking a look at the hardware. So we're going to meet by the registration desk at 5:15, so in like 10 minutes. So it'll be quick over there, in and out. Won't take much time and won't overlap with your game time. So.
Okay, so you have the opportunity to see one of the first nodes on the ARPANET, or the internet. It's right across the way. I saw it last night. It's a great 5 minutes. So have fun, everyone. See you tomorrow.